Hello and welcome to the I Can Do podcast with Benjamin Lee. We're here to talk about tips and strategies to have an I Can Do mindset. Life is what you put into it. Get the most you can. Here's your host, Benjamin Lee.
All right, Tuesdays, takeaways. You can see here I have a book called Disney's Land by Richard Snow. I want to begin. I have some really great thoughts from this book, or this book has given me some great thoughts that I want to share with you. I want to begin on page 149. And this is going to drive to one of the big takeaway that I want to share with you today from this book about Walt Disney and the creation of Disneyland. On page 149, it says that Disneyland really began when my two daughters were very young. Saturday was always Daddy's Day, and I would take them to the merry-go-round and sit on a bench eating peanuts while they rode. And sitting there alone, I felt there should be something built, some kind of family park where parents and children could have fun. The bench on which he sat is currently on display in the Disneyland Opera House on Main Street. So that is where or how Disneyland would begin. But fast or go backwards, if we rewind, there were a number of things at Walt Disney, and this is not going to be a full detail of his life, but there were a number of things that Walt Disney experienced. He was a superb storyteller. He was a visionary. He was a father. He was a husband. He was a brother. His brother played a tremendous impact, really investing in him and helping him to even be able to complete Disneyland. But at the same time, throughout all of the successes that he had, Walt Disney also had a lot of stress. On page number 26, it talked about the fact that Disney had a nervous breakdown, or that he was heading toward a nervous breakdown. It says that he had one or something like that back in 1931. Years later, he said of that time that he had a breakdown. I went all to pieces. As we got going along, I kept expecting more from the artist. And when they let me down and things, I got worried. Just pound, pound, pound. Costs were going up, and I was always way over what they figured the pictures would bring in, talking about his movies. I just got very irritable. I got to a point that I couldn't talk on the telephone. I would begin to cry. He had recovered. Here it is. Here's where we're driving towards for today's Tuesday takeaway. He had recovered by taking a leisurely cross-country trip with Lillian. The first time we had been away on anything like that since we were married, and returned, he said, a new man. So the first is with taking a vacation, getting away for a little bit with his wife. Now it seemed again to be just pound, pound, pound. Once more, the money was not coming in. You look at Walt Disney, Disney's World, Disneyland, or Disney World and Disneyland and everything today, but he experienced this a lot. He said his last successful feature, Bambi, was 6 years in the past. Cinderella, nowhere near finished. The studio, like the country, and the uneasy post-war doldrums. Disney was often aggrieved, abrupt, and when not angry, remote. So a vacation would help him really get to be able to recover and to balance. And then it said that Disney would have spoken with her about his brief stint as a news butcher on the Missouri Pacific and his Lionel train. She, I think talking about his wife, had spotted a newspaper report of a forthcoming all-train pageant, the Chicago Railroad Fair. And it was under the Chicago Museum of Science and Industry, the New York Central, Northern Pacific, Rock Island, Illinois Central, Great Northern, Erie, and 30 other lines had built exhibits on 50 acres of Lake Michigan shorefront. So Disney's going to hear about this Chicago Railroad Fair. Now it says that he was intrigued, or instantly intrigued. He said that he'd like to go. So George suggested, and I believe George, if I remember correctly, was his brother, suggested he take Ward Kimball along. Disney said, yeah. So he said, Kimball is always relaxed. Maybe it's because he's got such a wonderful hobby running that big steam engine in his backyard. Folks, this is where the book is really, really interesting. Walt Disney is going to get so involved with hobbies that it's going to help him to relax, to recover, to rejuvenate. And he was a collector in many respects with a couple of things. He was a collector with respect to trains, other figurines. I'm going to move over to page number 55 here for just a second and then come back to this idea of trains. And it says here on page 55, he's going to build a train called the Lily Bell. And it says Disney had been drawn to miniatures well before the Lily Bell. Visitors to the 1939 Golden Gate International Exposition in San Francisco were charmed by an exhibit of the Thorn Rooms. These were the hobby, actually, too narrow a word to describe, an intense and meticulous exercise in architectural history of a Chicago artist named Narcia Niblack Thorne. In 1932, she started commissioning and overseeing the construction on a 1-inch scale of domestic interior. So think about this, really small, whatever you want to call it, miniatures. That's how they're described here. And they just had such exquisite realism. They recreated rooms like parlors, kitchens, bedchambers, foyers from Europe, Asia, and America among the 13th century and 1940. Her husband was James Ward Thorne, and he was an heir to the Montgomery Ward mail order fortune. So she was able to employ a team of 30 master craftsmen who mailed matchstick floorboards and cut real crystal pendants the size of grains of rice for chandeliers. So Disney is going to find these miniatures, go to this exhibit. The Thorn Room enchanted Disney, it says, and he began to collect miniatures with such enthusiasm that in 1951 he would write a friend, my hobby is a lifesaver. So think about some of these takeaways here. Disney had tons of stress. Hobbies were something that helped him tremendously. Yes, taking a vacation, getting away, but going to these different exhibits or expos. Hobby, he says, this particular hobby, it was a lifesaver. When I work with these small objects, he said, I become so absorbed that the cares of the studio fade away, at least for a while. And so eventually he's going to start making these. So there's a couple of things that are going to help Disney along the way. Hobbies are going to be something that's going to be very important to him with his train, with these miniatures as well. Now, I want to go back to the train with Walt Disney because going to that train fair in Chicago had a big impact upon him. Now he was determined on page number 36 that he wanted to build a railroad of his own. He wanted a real train. He wanted his own railroad. He wanted to build some kind of prototype in the backyard of his Beverly Hills home. And that's what he's going to do. He's going to do this. And let me make sure I'm just reading that correctly here. That may have been about talking about his friend. Disney went to see one of his friends and a railroad that he had in his home or backyard in Beverly Hills. And so Disney is going to follow suit. So let me correct that here. So what he does, he builds his own house. Disney does on 355 Carolwood Drive on June 1st. He builds a big house. I believe it had 5 acres. And he's going to build a track in his backyard. 2,615 feet of track connected with 11 switches, so cunningly laid out that a train could steam along for nearly a mile without passing over any stretch of the line twice in the same direction. That's what he's going to have in his backyard. This won Disney's instant acceptance. So they're figuring out how this is all going to work. But there was a problem. He wants this real train track in his backyard. So the hobby has now turned into something at his home. This is eventually going to turn into something at Disneyland. That's why we see so many trains there today. So it says that Walt's track plan did not sit well with his wife. He complained to a colleague that his wife, Lily had made up her mind that I should not run my railroad completely around the house because it was going to run right through the middle of her garden. She wanted to have a large window put in so her friends could look out or can look out at her flowers while they are playing Kenesta. So he had to figure out, okay, what are we going to do? So they're going to build a tunnel that at 90 feet would be long enough to allow the train to pass under the garden. So the card players would never have to see it. So this is all in his backyard, that this hobby now that he is so infatuated with this train and trains as a whole, that he's going to make this at his house. And so that's what he does. Um, he called the train or the locomotive Lily Bell. It's for his wife Lillian, and he said that he thought that she would be pleased. Besides, she had been a good sport about this whole railroading project. So he begins to build this train track and to build this train in the backyard. And it says that the Lily Bell was joined by equally perfect freight cars, a yellow caboose that Disney built entirely by himself. It took him a full year and 6 passengers carrying gondolas. Unlike the other cars, which were made solely from the same materials that went into their 19th century prototypes, these latter were molded aluminum. So he's putting in so much time and money for this hobby. Can you relate to that? But this hobby is going to serve him well. All right. And so what happens eventually is that he's going to have these parties at his house. Now, Disney, it says he was not much for going to Hollywood parties, but they did enjoy holding gatherings at their house, at which the Carolwood Pacific was the main event. And a lot of people from Hollywood, check this out. Frank Sinatra would come, the 6-year-old Candice Bergen with her famous ventriloquist father, Edgar, the producers, Walter Wenger and Hal Wallace, came, Kirk Douglas, who had a leading role in Disney's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. He came as well. And the train was big enough that you could actually ride the train. You could sit on top of it and it could haul 2,000 pounds. And so this is all going on in his backyard, all on this 5-acre piece of land. Well, people in Hollywood hear about it. And then there's a magazine called Look Magazine, and they ran an article on it that generated so much interest that Disney established a micro business selling working drawings and even castings based on the Lily Bell. So now his hobby has turned into revenue. But it didn't start off like that. Remember, he's under a lot of stress. He's trying to have fun. He's trying to endure so much difficulties in his life. So it went for 2 years, it says, with almost every weekend regularly punctuated with the Lily Bell's whistle and the bright chime of her bell. All right, now listen to this. Now, this is where things begin to change. Then, on a spring day in 1952, a guest who had been given a turn at the throttle managed to flog the train up to 40 miles an hour. The Lily Bell jumped the track and lay on her side, jetting high pressure steam from where her whistle had been snapped off. A 5-year-old girl ran over to see what was happening and got her leg scalded. The injury was minor, but Disney's response to it was not. He would say, "That's it. I want the train out of here. Take it back to the studio and store it in the machine shop." So this was not part of the original plan. He had ambitious plans about what he was going to do. But eventually, this train that he built would go under a drafting table and the rolling stock into storage. So, what happens next? By the time the Carolwood Pacific was done, talking about this train and these tracks, he had spent $50,000, half of it for the road bed and landscaping, half for the Lily Bell. So this hobby, just getting it started, would be about $50,000. Would take about a year, but it also opened up doors to people in Hollywood. It created great fun, enthusiasm, magazine articles, a micro business, and it gave Disney a lot of joy. So even though it ended, it also stirred something up in Disney. And people were kind of confused because he had so much care and love for this train. And they would go on to say, how strange that the boss should just drop it. Walt doesn't give up, said Brogy. So he must have something else in mind. Brogy was right. There was more to the sudden abandonment than that derailment. Disney had loved his railroad, but evidently now discovered it had done all it could to help with his larger plans. It had ceased to be a satisfactory answer to his long ago question to Brogy. This is an electric train. Now what's for real? So he had learned a good deal from building his train, but he'd perhaps learned more from creating a full operating system so carefully landscaped that it gave his guests, listen to this, an experience, a narrative really, of shifting scenes, one blending smoothly into the next, the highly literal but small scale trestle, the mysterious wiggle through the dark tunnel, and the sudden flash of daylight at its end. Here was a whole little world with him in absolute control, and one in which visitors weren't sitting back and watching a screen, but rather were full participants. You know what that sounds like? That sounds like Disney's Land. That sounds like Disneyland and Disney World. So the effort that he put into, as we begin to wrap up here, let me give you a couple of concluding thoughts. Walt Disney needed a lot of hobbies. He needed some kind of escape, so to speak. And what this book shows me, it reminded me and reminds me the value of hobbies. Walt Disney had a lot of stress, and hobbies could help him to escape for a little bit. Now, he still had reality, but hobbies are something good for all of us, whatever they may be. Hobbies are meant and designed to go full in, all the way in. He spent $50,000. And I'm not telling you to spend $50,000 on your hobbies. But what I am saying is really have fun with them and really learn, whether it's a miniature or a railroad track. Lean into that hobby and learn as much as you can for it, not to make money, but just to enjoy it. And that's what Disney did. Think about this. Sometimes hobbies eventually have a ending point as well. This actually stirred up his imagination and saw, wait a second, what people really want more of are experiences, action. And that's exactly what this would lead to. So hobbies can just be there to help a person, help us to escape. But they also could create new ideas and generate new opportunities without us even thinking about it. So what hobbies do you have? What are you passionate about? What are you just curious about? Just for the sake of being curious and wanting to learn it. That's what Walt Disney is reminding me about the value of hobbies, being curious, listening to the suggestions of others, going away, going to an expo, going to a convention, and trying something new. For him, it saved his life. For us, it can just bring us more joy. So think about this. This is our Tuesday takeaway. Disney's Land, Walt Disney and the invention of the amusement park that changed the world by Richard Snow. I'd love to hear what your hobbies are. I love Marvel. I'm a big Marvel fan. I enjoy watching the movies. learning about how Marvel Studios got started. If you know someone from Marvel Studios, please let me know. I'd love to have them on the show. I like talking about and figuring out what's next with the movies. What's your hobby? Where do you like to explore? Have fun and lean into the power of hobbies.